Hello, my name's Rob Edwards, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today we're still very much in the world of Wheel of Time. I am still obsessed with the trailer. I have watched it many times since we last spoke, and I expect I will watch it many more times before the show actually launches in November. I have begun re-listening again to the Wheel of Time audiobooks, and I'm about halfway through The Eye of the World right now. So I'm very much in the universe of Wheel of Time still, and still pretty excited about the whole thing. Also, just while I'm on the subject, a word of thanks to all those who watched my breakdown of the Wheel of Time trailer. I am absolutely overwhelmed with the number of people who saw it, liked it, commented on it, and subscribed to the channel. While my channel isn't a Wheel of Time channel, I suspect it may become one, certainly during November and December, I am still very much in that zone, and today is going to be no exception. I am going to be talking about an aspect of the Wheel of Time. In particular, the Wheel of Time role-playing game, which was released in 2001 by Wizards of the Coast. It is a strange beast. It is something which only had a very brief light of day, I think, back in 2001 when it first came out. It only had one expansion, a sort of adventure campaign book called Prophecy of the Dragon, which came out in 2002. And it kind of sank without a trace after that. It's no longer in print. I believe, in fact, Wizards of the Coast no longer have the license for the role-playing game, certainly according to Wikipedia. That's the case. So the chances of being able to find a copy of this is fairly limited. There may still be a few copies on the shelves of your friendly local game store, on eBay, or your favourite second-hand source for role-playing materials, but unless you've got a copy right now, it's probably quite difficult to lay your hands on one. I did run the Wheel of Time once, I think. If I remember right, it was a 6-week short campaign that I ran for some friends at a local gaming club back in 2001 or 2002, sort of that era. We'll talk about why it never really took off later on in the video. But today I want to talk a little bit about what it is, what it does, and caveats about it, I guess. Firstly, it is based on 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, so it's a little bit old for those of us who are moved on to playing 4th and 5th edition since then. And it really does feel like a thing of its time. I love the fact that on the cover of the book, on the back cover anyway, there's a big thing saying Web Enhanced, which means there are a couple of extra articles on the, or there were a couple of interesting articles on Wizards of the Coast, which you could download for some extra backgrounds and things like that. They aren't available anymore. As I say, WotC no longer have the license for this game. It's not a role-playing game to pick up if you are completely new to the Wheel of Time. It is assumed to be set after... Oh no, I can't even say the name of the battle because that would be a spoiler too. But around the end of Book 6, anyway. In fact, it was released about the same time as Winter's Heart. So there's quite a lot of spoilerific material just presented forward to you in the game book. There are even classes which would, I think, be considered to be a spoiler if you are just coming to Wheel of Time in the first instance. So this is a book to play in once your whole table has either watched a season or 2 of the show or read the first 2 or 3 books at least, and possibly even further beyond that. I would certainly want to have read at least book 3 before I even cracked open the role-playing game book. That said, I still have a few more things I can say without getting into spoiler territory, so let's have a look at some of the contents in the book. So one thing to note, of course, when you compare the Wheel of Time role-playing game to standard Dungeons & Dragons, is that mostly you can only play human characters. There's an exception to that, but I'll talk about that in the spoiler section of today's video. So instead of having presented a lot of races for you to play, instead you can choose what background, what region your character comes from. And while these don't do massive things to affect your attributes particularly, unlike most races in D&D, what they do give you access to is particular feats or particular skills that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily have access to. So, for example, if you choose to play a character from the Two Rivers in the show and in the books, that's in the middle of the country of Andor, which in the game book is referred to as part of the Middlelands. So if you are a Midlander, you can have access to one of 4 different feats. So this would be Strong Soul, Luck of Heroes, Militia, or Bullheaded. And each of those provides a little bit of a boost for your character, usually a +1 or +2 to a particular thing, so initiatives or saving throws or particular skills, essentially. They're not tend to be terribly overbalancing, but they give you a little bit of a flavour for characters who come from that area. And these background feats are restricted to particular areas. So if you are playing a character from Tar Valon, you might not, for example, have access to the bull-headed feat. I haven't checked. But, so it does mean that there are certain feats which are locked to certain backgrounds that you can only get if you have that particular background. The classes in the game, some of them are just reskins of standard 3.5 or 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, so the Armsman is more or less just a fighter. But there are some completely brand new classes. I think this was the first game book I came across which had a noble class in it. Although that said, I think Star Wars did it as well. Fantasycraft did it later on. So it's not unique to this setting. But nobles and nobility are key players in the Game of Thrones. No, that's wrong. The Game of Houses within the Wheel of Time. And so they are key players within the role-playing game as well. Of course, unlike Dungeons & Dragons, we don't have magic users and clerics, but we do have people who have access to the one power. So you do have the ability to take a character who can use magic in fairly limited ways at first level, but obviously you can get stronger in these things as you go forwards. One thing which is a bit different about these classes is 2 new things which are in the class table. So you get your normal saving throws and attack bonuses and class features, but as well, each class has a defense bonus and a reputation bonus. The defense bonus is used in place of your armor if you're not wearing any armor. Actually, if you're wearing armor, you get a choice between the 2 of them. This, I think, is to cope with the fact that so many of the characters that we see in Wheel of Time never bother strapping any armor on. So if you want to go into a fight like some of the characters, again, I was about to say names, but if you want to go into a fight like some of your favourite characters from the books or the show, you won't be seeing them strap on plate mail or sort of shugging on a chain shirt. Mostly they'll be going in their regular clothes, which means there has to be some way to avoid blows. So that's what the defense bonus is for. And the reputation bonus, well, as it suggests, basically, if you are known in an area, that might give you advantages for social interaction type stuff. There are stats for most of the main characters in the books, or at least a lot of the main characters in the books. So I can tell you that at the time that this campaign book is set, so around the end of book 6, Moiraine Sedai is level 15. I think she has 8 levels of Initiate and 7 levels of the Aes Sedai Prestige class. Yes, this is 3rd edition, so Prestige classes are a thing. I wanted to do this comparison. This is a rather fabulous picture of Moiraine Sedai from the TV show, and a rather fabulous picture of Moiraine Sedai from the role-playing game book. Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that Moiraine Sedai from the book there is not out adventuring in the world, but is probably wandering around in palaces to dress quite as fancy as that. And yes, she is wearing her Caesara. I was so close to getting that name right. As everyone pointed out to me when I said it began with C, it doesn't, it begins with K, and that is the gemstone that she's wearing. A Caesara, I think, is the pronunciation of it. So, rather fantastic little picture there. It should be pointed out, of course, that a lot of the stat blocks provide spoilers for a lot of the characters in the book. So again, don't read them if you haven't read the books. Before I get into talking a few specific spoilers, which are not really something you should watch if you haven't read the books or watched the show yet, I do want to talk a little bit about why I think Wheel of Time never really made any huge ripples in the role-playing game world. It's strange, isn't it? Because, you know, the books are genuinely beloved. I know a lot of people who are big fans of the books, and most of them are role players. And it's interesting to me that it is a book which, you know, I played it, I ran it a little bit, but even and I'm a big Wheel of Time fan, never really came back to it a lot. And I think a part of this is actually, I'm not sure that the story of Wheel of Time is a good fit for Dungeons and Dragons. Because Dungeons and Dragons is about combat. All of your characters have, attack bonuses and armor classes and saving throws and big weapons and spells and all that kind of stuff. That's Dungeons and Dragons. And in Dungeons and Dragons, you go into a dungeon, you beat up some monsters and take their loot, and isn't that thrilling? Yes, it is. Top banana. But the Wheel of Time setting is a lot more about political intrigue, factions working against each other. Yes, there is combat in it, and yes, traditional adventuring stuff happens, but it's a lot more personal, and it's a lot more internalized, I think, maybe, in terms of what people deal with in the Wheel of Time books. And I don't think that's really something which plays to the strengths of Dungeons and Dragons. There are other game systems I think might do a lot better with Wheel of Time. But I think there was a bit of a strange oddity there. It's also weird forming an adventuring party. There are certain types of characters, and again I'm trying to be vague without providing spoilers here, which it would be difficult to see working together as first level characters and sort of adventuring together. Okay, if you want to play an Aes Sedai, you can't play an Aes Sedai at first level because first level is not powerful enough to be an Aes Sedai. So at first level, you are going to be playing somebody. If you are playing a channeler, you're going to be playing somebody who is only just beginning to learn to use the wand power, because that's how level 1 works. If you are not an initiate in the wand tower, then a lot of your time is going to be spent trying to avoid people who are. If you are an initiate in the wand tower, then they're probably not going to let you out adventuring. And I think that represents a problem in terms of building a team, building a party. And there are other classes within the book which absolutely would not work together with the Aes Sedai, or even an initiate of the Aes Sedai, not comfortably anyway. And a lot of the non-channeling classes are all quite similar. I mean, they're not. They all have their own distinct personalities and their own distinct things, but an armsman versus a wanderer versus they're all in the same ballpark. And I don't think there's enough kind of wow factor to some of these classes to really make them stand out. There are a few things in the spoiler section I can talk about which could potentially have made for wow things, but they're not classes, they're feats. And again, it's kind of going into, am I playing a character that really excites me? Do I want to play a character like this character from the books or that character from the book? How is that reflecting in my character as a D&D character, as a Wheel of Time role-playing game character? And I don't think it ever really works. Certainly, when I ran the game, much fun though I've had trotting people around in my own turning of the Wheel of Time, I don't know that it was a really good fit for the D&D rule system. I hope that with the resurgence that the Wheel of Time is going to get over the next few years, that we see a new Wheel of Time game system. I kind of hope it is not based around 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I would rather they went their own way with it, to try and have some more mechanics, like some of the house rules we had in the Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game. There's some really interesting stuff that you could work around with in that. Or to go some classless system which lets you build a character with a bit more flexibility. That's all I wanted to say in my non-spoiler section. I do have just a short few things I want to say in the spoiler section. If you have read the books but you've never encountered the role-playing game before, I want to talk about how they handle a few things. If you have not read the books, do not watch to the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching up until this point, and I will catch you next time. But if you are staying with me, spoilers very, very soon. Like now. So I thought I would use this picture for this. It is, of course, Legane in his cage, surrounded by Red Sisters. Interesting that the role-playing game also seems to want to have the Aes Sedai dressed entirely in their colours, because those are clearly Red Sisters surrounding the cage there. But again, that's not necessarily exactly how the books go. But I did want to talk a little bit about how it handles a few things which you might be curious about. For example, I said in the non-spoiler section that for the most part you can only play humans. There is one exception to that. There are rules for playing an Ogier. If you wanted to do that, then the game system does let you. You have less access to the background feats and background skills, but you do have a big bonus of strength, penalty to dex. You are large sized, and there are bonuses for sort of arts and building and crafting type stuff as well, of course. So that's quite interesting. If you're curious how the game handles things like Min's foretelling or Perrin's wolf-friendness, those are all handled through feats. They aren't designed as classes. Those are all feat-based. And one interesting thing which I think is very curious, but I can see why they've done it, is that most of these things require you to take 2 feats. First, you have to take a feat so that you are latent in a particular skill, so in particular latent foretelling or latent wolf brother, and these basically don't give you mechanically anything at all, really, except for the ability to take the later feat, which lets you take the full suite of abilities. And I think this is really interesting because it does mean that most characters aren't going to start out with these things. You know, they're not going to start with foretelling. But if you are taking latent foretelling at first level, it tells the GM where you want to go with your character. And the GM can start planting seeds in the campaign, maybe giving you half-seen foretellings, which aren't enough really at this point to give you any information at all. But maybe when you graduate into the full foretelling skill, that gives you some extra options, which I always rather liked that. But it does, again, tend to leave your first level character a little bit vanilla. You've spent a feat to get nothing at first level, so that's not terribly exciting. There is a class which is specific for Ail, the Agai de Siswai, he says. Again, book word, I've never tried to pronounce it out loud before today. But if you wanted to play an Ale, spear user, then you can take that class. And there are classes for initiates and wilders. So these are the starting classes if you are going to be using the 1 power. These are the classes which you take before you go on to take the prestige class for Aes Sedai or Asherman. Because yes, you can play both male and female channelers in the Wheel of Time. But there is a whole section on how to handle madness for male channelers. And I think this is a really tricky territory to be in. Because yes, it is completely in keeping with the book and it should be in there. But as a player, one thing I hate is having agency taken away from me by the Games Master. When the Games Master tells me that my character does X or my character, that's not what a role-playing game. A role-playing game is for me to play a character, not for my Games Master to play my character. So it's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of forced insanity in Call of Cthulhu, for example. Which means I'm not a Call of Cthulhu player. I mean, lots of people love it. Don't get me wrong. If that's your jam, then that's perfectly fine. It's not mine. But there are rules for it, and they're quite interesting. They're not terribly heavy or in depth, but they do give you the option of taking a wilder, typically, who can channel for the male side. And later there is prestige. I think there are prestige classes for Asherman. So the options are there. If you want to go that route, you can absolutely go that route. In a game, if everyone else is playing almsmen and wanderers and nobles, if there is one character who is a channeler, that is going to balance the party slightly weirdly. And again, that is another thing which I think means that I don't think necessarily that Dungeons & Dragons is a good fit for the Wheel of Time. I absolutely think the Wheel of Time is a wonderful setting to have a role-playing game in. I think you can have a lot of fun in this setting. And I mentioned that there was a campaign book, Prophecies of the Dragon, it's called. Takes you from the end of book 1 to the end of book 6, I think. I've never actually had it. I actually found it in a local game store on sale right now, so I have picked it up. It's on its way to me in the post. It's not here yet. Maybe once I see it, I'll get excited by it. Then maybe maybe I could run a game or two on stream. That would be fun. Or not. But there we go. It's interesting. It's not. I think Dungeons & Dragons was not a good fit for it. Dungeons & Dragons was the best choice in terms of brand awareness and getting it out there in front of people. I completely understand why Robert Jordan would want to be associated with Wizards of the Coast. There's a really interesting an introduction written by Robert Jordan in the gaming book talking about his experience of Dungeons & Dragons, being the dungeon master for his stepson Will. Which is really charming, and it sounds like he was a nightmare to be your DM because he didn't let anything go. He was very much by the rules and very much did terrible things to people's characters by the sounds of it, which does seem in keeping with his books as well. But interesting to see that Robert Jordan did play, was a Dungeons and Dragons person, and that I can certainly see why then he would want to go the Dungeons and Dragons route because of the name recognition. But I genuinely think if we were to see a new Wheel of Time, I would prefer it to be a system of its own, certainly not a reskin of D&D 5e. Anyway, this video has gone a lot longer than I intended to again, so if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Cheers.